Donald Trump has won elections in the United States. In your opinion, how that's going to reflect on a situation in entire world?
So I think obviously the Trump victory is a very difficult problem for America's allies. America itself is a big, strong country and has strong institutions, and it may well be that Mr. Trump is not able to do some of the stupid things that he's promised during the campaign, and some of the more sensible things like reforming the tax system could go ahead. So I'm not so worried about America internally, but I'm very worried about America's allies and the future of the West, because it's quite clear from what Mr. Trump says, has written in his books and as well as in his campaign remarks, that he doesn't really believe in the idea of the West. He doesn't like the idea of having allies. He doesn't really like the multilateral world order. He admires strength in foreign leaders and stability far more than the promotion of values and all the things that America traditionally has stood for. And so in his room for maneuver in foreign policy, he has the capability to do some quite severe damage, and I'm worried about that.
We know that he's looking towards Russia, to have a relationship with Russia and with Mr. Putin. Do you think that there's going to be a big change in relations between United States and Russia?
I think there's certainly a danger that he tries to do what's sometimes called a grand bargain, where he would say to Putin, look, I will back off on human rights, I will end the sanctions, I will accept that you have a sphere of influence in your neighboring countries or neighboring regions, and maybe I won't put any more American troops in the Baltics, or maybe even I'll take American troops out of the frontline states. And all those are things that he can basically do if he wants. In return, Putin would offer cooperation on terrorism, particularly in Syria and against ISIS, and a general easing of tensions, and maybe also some trade and investment preferences. Now, I think this would be a very bad deal. It wouldn't stick. It would be a betrayal of the frontline states who've been very loyal allies for Russia, and it would open the door to a lot more Russian mischief making. Maybe not immediately, but soon. And we would then face a resurgent and stronger Russia.
What kind of impact this will have on Putin himself? Is this going to strengthen him in international scene, or is going to weaken him on international scene?
Oh, it's certainly going to strengthen him. I mean, it makes it much harder for the West to apply pressure on both human rights issues such as the Magnitsky sanctions and also on Ukraine and on Syria, all the areas where we've been hoping to see more Western pressure on Putin. I think there's bound to be less under Trump. So this puts a huge responsibility on Angela Merkel, who's now in effect the leader of the free world. But of course, her own position in Germany is not that great. And we have elections coming up in France and in the Netherlands, a referendum in Italy. So there's plenty more potential electoral hiccups ahead. So it's looking pretty bleak, I think, for the West, and that means it's automatically looking quite good for Putin, because his main aim is to end what he calls the unipolar world and what people like me would call Western leadership.
Recently, we had the meetings between EU and NATO leaders in Brussels, where they have talked how to proceed if Trump backs off from NATO, and if Putin has more strength. How do you think, what's going to be impact on NATO and EU, this relation?
I think the impact on both NATO and the EU will be profound, but in both cases the common point is that the Europeans have to start taking defence seriously. They need to spend real money, which most of them don't. They need to identify the real threats, which many of them don't. They're still living in a kind of la-la land. They need to take real risks and make real sacrifices, and to take defence as what it should be, as the number one national priority. If a government can't guarantee the security of its citizens, then nothing else matters. And for too long, the European countries have been free riders in NATO, most of them, and the European Union has not really seen itself as a security organisation. It does a bit of economic security, it does a bit of policing, but it now, I think, needs to realise that it has to become a full-blown security actor. And this is going to be very complicated because we need to try and combine efforts rather than duplicating them. So although the Europeans need to do more, I would like to see them doing more within NATO and to help NATO rather than setting up an independent European military, which I think would be both weak, and ineffective, and would distract even more from an already troubled NATO.
You live in England and you have sensed what the Brexit means for England. Can you tell for our people here in Balkans exactly how Britain lives today after that decision of Brexit, and do you already sense some major effects?
Well, for me personally, I think Brexit was one of the saddest days of my life, even though it hasn't happened yet. But that vote was a traumatic turn away from something that I've spent all my life trying to do, which is to increase the engagement of Britain in Europe, and particularly in the former communist countries. And I think that a lot of the discussion since then has been very confused and abstract. We talk about trade deals, we talk about the future outside the EU, we talk about when we're going to invoke Article 50 and start the countdown. But my impression from talking to senior people in government is that people are really very confused about what to do, and this is undoing a marriage which has been effectively a marriage of 50 years, and from 1973 until no, it's not quite 50 years. It is a marriage of we've been in since 1973, so that's a very long time, and the undoing that involves hard-nosed financial bargaining. It also involves what you might call looking after the children. We need to maintain an amicable relationship going forward. Now, I think that's all doable, but it will require some strong political leadership on both sides, which I think is absent at the moment. It also will consume a huge amount of energy. We will be, a lot of our best and brightest politicians and decision makers and bureaucrats will be devoting themselves to this, which is basically I think brings us no net benefit. And that's all time they could spend on things that really matter, like worrying about terrorism or Russia, or continuing the integration of the single market and all the things that we were on our to-do list at the time the Brexit vote happened.
During this presidential campaign in the United States, we have heard that Russia had interfered through cyber attacks in elections. You know so much about that. Is there any truth in those claims that Russia have intervened through cyber attacks in the United States? And if it is, are they going to do that again, no matter what? Is it US or any other country in the world?
I think there's a consistent Russian pattern of interference in other countries' politics, and they are refining their tools all the time. And I think this is a very clever combination of what I call hacking and leaking. So you use electronic intelligence means to steal confidential data, in this case emails, but in the past it's also been phone calls and other material, or just bugged conversations in restaurants, as happened in Poland. And then you leak them in order to have a political effect. And that political effect can be to destroy a politician or political party. It can be just to increase mistrust in the electoral system, or it can be to promote a particular candidate. And I think that this Russian tactic was probably more successful than they anticipated. I don't think they thought that Trump was going to win. I don't think Trump thought he was going to win. What they were hoping was that he would lose, but be a bad loser. And this would cripple the American political system with lawsuits and protests and so on. So I think that they've now got Trump in the White House. And I'm not sure they're completely happy about that, because although he is pro-Russian in some ways and his team has pro-Russian people on it, he's also a very unpredictable character. And if if you are a weak country, and Russia is basically a weak country, and you're dealing with a very strong country, you most of all want that country to be predictable. And so I think that they are now possibly a little bit more worried than they were about what they'll really be dealing with over the next 4 years.
We recently have seen some Russia's influence here in Bosnia and in Montenegro in a time when Montenegro is joining NATO. We have heard that some groups have tried to make a coup d'etat in Montenegro. Can we expect that Russia now, when United States is weak with Donald Trump, will try to play more on a card here in Balkans and destabilize Europe through Balkans even more than it was trying before?
I think you're absolutely right. This is happening, and you're right to be worried about it. And I remember a year ago, President Plevneviev of Bulgaria telling me that he thought that the Russians were trying to create a kind of axis across the Balkans, and that his country would be first, and after that it would then be Serbia and Bosnia or Montenegro. And this gives the Russians a kind of corridor across the Balkans of influence. And this is the sort of way they look at the world, and it seems to me that he was right, and this is what's going on. And whether it's these kind of special operations involving violence, which we've seen in quite recently in Hungary with the far right activists in Hungary who were working together with the Russian military intelligence, whether it's the coup plots that we've seen in Serbia and Montenegro, or whether it's these hacking and leaking attacks, which I just mentioned, or whether it's going to be some other tactic, maybe the use of the energy weapon and cozy energy deals, which we've also seen in Hungary. Russia's very capable of deploying these weapons and using them effectively, and we in the West don't at the moment have an effective counter